Welcome to SHOWstudio's live panel discussions. In these discussions, experts from across the industry discuss and debate the most important shows on the fashion schedule. Today, for our first panel of the couture season, we will be discussing Balenciaga. My name is MC Hill, and I'm a critic for SHOWstudio. Why don't we go around our bubbles for introductions so that our audience can place names to analysis?
Okay. Hi, I'm Joshua James Small. I'm a sustainable women's wear designer, freelance writer, and model with First Model Management.
Hello, I'm Cally Blackman. I teach fashion history and theory at Central St Martin's. I trained in fashion design and I also write books as well.
Hi, I'm Stephen. I'm a creative director of my accessory brand, Stephen Ma.
Brilliant. Thank you, panelists. Let's give our audiences a slight overview before we begin to discuss. For Balenciaga's 50th couture collection and their first under creative director, Demna Gvasalia, the code's uniqueness, craftsmanship, scarcity, and sustainability were kind of a guide he used to guide elevated proposals. He aimed to connect Christóbal Balenciaga's concepts to a modern audience. There's no client exclusivity here. If denim and tees are your style, just save your trainer money to buy Balenciaga denim with genuine silver buttons or puffy tees suffused with Christóbal Balenciaga's sense of lightness. Gvasalia seemed to mine the noble roots of couture to expand, quite literally, the shape and the perception of not old, but new fashion qualifiers for elegance, sophistication, and respect. In a BOF story published yesterday, Demna spoke about his holy trinity of designers being Gabrielle Chanel, Martin Margiela, and Christóbal Balenciaga. I'd like for us to consider this Coco Chanel quote as we unpick this collection. Dress shabbily and they remember the dress. Dress impeccably and they remember the woman. Who'd like to go first in regards to what they saw today?
Shall I go?
Sure, Cally.
Okay, well, I thought it was a really stunning collection that created a fantastic dialogue between between Gvasalia and Balenciaga, between today and the past, between the heritage and the now, and indeed between high fashion and what we used to call street style. And actually it made me fall in love with couture all over again. I realized I've had my head buried in history for far too long, because this really actually made me, very excited. I thought it was beautiful.
Nice.
Got lots more to say, but that's it.
Okay. Stephen,
yeah, I was going to say, I'll just jump in now. I was going to say I thought it was exquisite. It was a really, really nice collection. I feel like with couture, you either go two ways. I feel like it could be like my personal favorite, which is like Galliano over extreme. Do you know what I mean? It touches every sense, or it can be very subtle and done very well. And the what you're looking for in that couture collection is essentially the way things made and how well that tailoring is done. And it was just it hit all of the criteria you would want from a couture collection. I think there were, as with every collection, there were a few looks which I think could have been left out. But I mean, overall, it really was quite wonderful. And in the context of the couture shows we've seen, I think it was one of the standouts. It seems to be for couture, in my opinion, it's both two ends of the spectrum. Some collections have been really quite dire, and some collections, including this one, have been quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Stephen?
As a huge fan of Balenciaga and Demna, and also a very religious customer point of view, I love this collection, and I think it's a great combination between the business wear to the streetwear and the spirit of craftsmanship of couture. Yeah, it's a brilliant.
Nice. Well, there were 63 total looks. Let's talk about the first few exits. Cally, I'm thinking of you with this one. Like he seemed to incorporate a bit of Christóbal characteristics here with the red rose against the stark black contrast. I also thought about his debut men's collection from spring 17, which was kind of like the formal, the papal kind of suits his vestments, which felt very Christóbal, and mixed it with kind of like humor and that like Uncle Fester, Addams Family shoulder. What did we think about those first couple of exits?
Oh my God. I mean, the tailoring, I thought the tailoring was absolutely exquisite. just so many references to Balenciaga's work as well in the whole collection throughout, but particularly in the tailoring, I think. And I always go for tailoring above everything else. I'm obsessed by it a bit. You know, for example, the hourglass silhouette. I mean, that's pure Christóbal, and he's reinterpreted that again in quite a lot of the looks, but particularly in some of the beautiful suits. And I have a picture of a suit which maybe we could show, which was look 15, you know, which really kind of echoes look 15. And I also love the way he, you know, he interpreted it as a dinner jacket, as a tuxedo, as the tweed dress that we've just seen there. And people always say, you know, that Christian Dior introduced a new look in 1947, and he was the first person to come up with this silhouette. But actually, there's the suit there. That's dated I forget, it's 1940s. You know, Balenciaga came up with that skirted jacket with the emphasis on the hip. He was doing that stuff in 1943, you know, before Dior. So I just absolutely loved the tailoring. I thought it was really beautiful. And there are many other things that he references throughout the collection. But if we're just talking about the first exits, yeah, they were beautiful.
Yeah, I was going to say the tailoring was absolutely exquisite. It was a really strong start to the collection, really. And it wasn't, I mean, I was expecting it to be a bit lackluster because maybe I'd underestimated, because Demna Gvasalia is used to throwing in so much like casual wear into his ready-to-wear collections, you know, t-shirts whatsoever. I wasn't sure whether this would be evocative of what I would expect for a couture collection, but it really was from the get-go because that tailoring is impeccable. And I was listening into SHOWstudio earlier because I'd actually forgotten that going back about 4 years, the silhouette was reinterpreted from the early like 60s, 70s silhouettes in a 3D mold. So it was a 3D print, it could be 3D made to people's bodies. I forgot about this. This was about 2015, 2016, I think. And then these silhouettes here we see are kind of replicas of the silhouettes from like 4 years ago that were made in this more modern way, except these are now handmade and hand sewn, which is a nice arc back to Christóbal's collections.
Yeah. And Stephen, any thoughts?
There's one jacket with the wrinkles on top, which I think is a very great combination between the classic Balenciaga business attire, which was what they were really good at, and like with a touch of Demna's idea, which I find it very interesting to be included in the couture collection. And I think if you go down a bit, there is one picture with the jacket has the wrinkles on top. The details is amazing.
Nice. What do we think of some of the kind of oversized shawls from the collection? It had kind of like an early 60s volume, kind of like hefty gazar. And I'm thinking of an image, Christina, I think it's the Irving Penn image with Lisa Fassana-Greaves and kind of the sack dress. It kind of felt like that fabric. Yeah, that one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it had that real volume to it, and kind of a mix of lightness and also heft as well. Hetty did.
Yeah, one of the things I really loved about the show actually was the absence of music. And what that allowed you to hear was the sound of those fabrics. And so when those evening looks came out, the evening coats and things, and the sound of the fabric on the model's legs and on the carpet was what I think you were supposed to hear, you know, and it was fabulous. It was obviously quite unsettling, I think, for the audience, and must have been quite spooky for the models, but overall, I think it was just a brilliant thing to do because, you know, you could almost, through the sound of the fabrics, you can sense the feel of them and the weight of them. And then when there was a sequin model that came out, you sort of could hear a more crispy kind of sound, and I just love that part of it.
Yeah, it's a great point, Cally. Like these things can get quite heady, and I think the fact that you could hear the actual textural feel of things, it added a real sensitivity to it and excitement.
I mean, nobody ever talks about the sound that clothes make, but it's a very important element, I think, of how you remember things and how you sense things and how you evaluate fabric.
I just want to add in on here. I think that the lack of sound in general was just perfect. I think it was because I do personally like a show where it is a show, something really overt that hits all senses, but I also really do appreciate and see that there is a place for this silence. I think couture is exactly where you want this silent kind of, you want to feel like you're in the atelier, you want to feel like you're experiencing, because the focus should be on the clothes themselves. It should be, and I thought it was beautiful how you could hear, like you were saying, hear the garments, but I loved that you were looking at one look and then all of a sudden you could hear this massive rustling from, I guess, the corridor behind, and it was because you as like anticipation of this enormous look that would come next. I quite liked that. Also, I thought that the sound had depth, like the lack of sound had depth to it on two ways, because obviously we've spent the last year and a half being afraid of the sound of someone coughing, do you know what I mean, or anything like that. And obviously those sort of environments, as we all know, shows, they're quite dry. Everyone, do you know what I mean? So you end up occasionally there'll be someone that has a cough or something that you can't help. Obviously there was no music to cover that up, so I thought it added like a level of severity to it, because everyone had to just sit there in silence, and it was a really good pause post pandemic, I suppose. But I thought it was quite nice that there was no music.
I thought you made a really good point there, which I hadn't thought of. I mean, I think that is evocative of the man himself, because he was always known as this kind of very aesthetic, almost monastic man who worked in isolation, and that's probably what was meant by the silence. Exactly.
And the contrast of this show from the Balenciaga shows before is like very amazing, because all the show, like a few shows from before, it's like very loud music and bright red carpet, bright blue carpet with lights, like light tunnels and very extreme environments. And this show, very neutral background with the historical location and no music. I think the contrast is very rebellious in a way and amazing.
You kind of like think of maybe the last show, the very last show in Paris, the atmospheric, the environmental catastrophe show, and the extreme nature, the extreme direness of that show, and then kind of an austere severity of this show. You think of Eliza Douglas being the first exit, right? And kind of like cutting the audience off as they were kind of gossiping and chatting to themselves, and then just really inserts a presence and an intensity that you need to focus on everything. You need to observe, and it's not about you. I think it's what Josh said earlier, where it is about the clothes.
Yeah, I mean, that's sweet. I thought that was quite beautiful how at the start you could hear everyone's mutterings, because everyone's been dying for social activity, and this couture season is really the first full season where people are going to shows, seeing people in real life. So everyone was, I suppose, chit-chatting and seeing people in real life. And I adored as that first look walked through, and it was kind of, it swept through the whole audience. This silence, you could drop a pin. Do you know what I mean? It was just quite beautiful.
Yeah, agreed.
But to answer your original question, MC, those evening, coats were so evocative of what he was doing for Mona Bismarck. There's that famous photograph standing in her wonderful drawing room, in one of the, almost exactly the same. Another reference, another layer of reference, his clients.
True. Cally, Christóbal's clothes, at least in photographs, like always felt kind of like floaty and kind of like bouncing off the body, following the curves in a free-flowing way. Did you, and Joshua and Stephen as well, did you find that Demna's manipulation of that effect, that visual effect, did you find that successful? Did you find him being successful with that?
Yeah, I thought it did. I thought it was perfectly evocative of what you would expect from both Demna and Christóbal combined. Like I said at the start, I do feel like there are a few looks that could have been filtered out, and I think that was the workwear. I mean, I do understand why Demna wants to insert and inject workwear in, but I feel like the couture client doesn't even think about workwear. That doesn't come to mind. So I think they could have successfully got rid of a couple of looks, but the enormity and the volume of those looks, well, it was perfect. It really did mirror what you would expect from a couture collection from Balenciaga, and it was a good continuation from this stopgap of 50 years. If you look at perhaps the last couture collection 50 years ago and now, I think it would continue. Nice, it creates a nice story, I suppose. It's a nice update on what exists.
I think I associate the floatiness of Balenciaga with his kind of floral dresses, his more summery dresses. And there was only a couple of floral models in this collection. One with the amazing dress in the front and black skirt in the back, or is it trousers? I'm not sure, in look 62. And then there's the pink one, 49. And I think they're the only two florals. I suppose that you could say that there are a couple of polka dots, black on white and white on black, which are quite floaty. But for me, and it's, yeah, I don't think that's, I don't think it matters if he didn't do that or much of that, because I think everything else is so strong, really. And I agree, there are one or two things in there that I don't think really needed to be in there, and I felt really kind of back out in a way that I didn't like the candlewick dressing gowns, which just prayed to be very banal, reminded me of bedspreads, candlewick bedspreads.
But the heaviness, I did think the heaviness of those garments was Demna's version of these floaty dresses. Do you know what I mean? Although I'm personally not a fan of these that look like dressing robes. They just look like dressing gowns. They don't look like anything spectacular to me, but I understand and I can see the silhouette itself. It has the scale that these floaty Christóbal dresses has, so it's kind of like Demna's version of that. So despite them, I assume they would be quite heavy, they give that illusion of having that presence that Christóbal's like floaty dresses would have.
He got the seamlessness right to where everything was kind of perfectly finished without a visible seam, which is that's a real Christóbal thing as well. And also the collars kind of teaming away from the neck, thinking of that orange exit from maybe midpoint in the show to where like you had the collar just perfectly just off of the neck, which also felt very like Christóbal.
Well, yes, I mean, there's so many references to Balenciaga channeling the Japanese influence, Japanism, and I think that, you know, exposing the nape of the neck is always something. He always said that the nape of the neck was the sexiest part of the body, and that was also apparently what the Japanese thought, and that's why the kimono stands away at the back of the neck. And there's just so many, and I loved the hats. I thought the hats, apparently by Philip Tracy, is that right? Well, amazing. Another reference to Japan, and sorry, I slightly lost my thread. There is just so many things that are evocative of that kind of recall Balenciaga's work, but interpret them in a sort of contemporary way. And I know that's been said a million times over, but it's actually really true. I mean, and I suppose that's indicative of Balenciaga's skill and the way he kind of was a bit of an anomaly within Parisian couture during the so-called golden years, because his work was like nobody else's. He wasn't sort of following, you know, trends and fashions as much. He was working through things in his own way and in his own mind, and maybe that's just created something that fits, or you know, would go on to fit with the future very, very easily, because they just look so right for now, you know.
Let's look at the denim exits, and what do we think about the denim as wrapped under the values of the house, where, you know, Christóbal said he never prostitute his talent, which is kind of why he closed his house, right? And, you know, he hated the like ready to wear ascendancy of the late 60s. And, you know, he hated vulgar things. And then you had Demna, on the other hand, who always observes the street. He's like a deep, deep societal observer. So, you know, Christóbal is focused on like rigorous craft and not so much what are these people doing over here. You know, he hated that. What do you think about all that?
I think that ties in with his own what he wore, you know, his own wardrobe, which was very relaxed and included lots of pieces of workwear from the local, you know, his own sort of area, what the fishermen and so on wore. And it also references Japan in a kind of indirect way in terms of boro and denim. And for me, that's the sort of thing I picked up on. And I rather liked it, I have to say.
Mm. Nice.
Yeah, I didn't. I was going to say I didn't. I'm not a massive fan of the denim, but I don't mind it. I see why. I understand why it's there. I think out of the whole collection, I think it works really well. So like look 25. So I think that's a really nice balance of the denim with this really overt top, and then that hat on top of it. It just the top half is A-level. Do you know what I mean? Couture, like it is a standard. The denim balances it well, I suppose, for a day look, and so it is couture for the day. But like I said, going back a little bit, I'm not sure that your couture client is looking for a well-made pair of denim trousers. I don't know. I just feel because your couture it's about 1,000 odd customers in the world. It's a very small pool of people that buy these pieces, and I feel that if they're spending that much money, are they really looking for these? I mean, I'm open to the idea that there is that consumer that's spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on a gown, but then is equally looking for a very expensive pair of denim jeans. But I like the idea, but I'm not sure that is there. But I mean, I don't mind the denim. It's well cut. It looks really nice, and it fits with the flow of the collection, so it's not too offensive.
Yeah,
I think the denim is one of the focal point to move the couture, traditional couture, into the future. And also, you know, the denim that he introduced in this collection is very well made. In a way, I think it's drawing couture into, you know, closer to more audiences, and it's a part of the rebellion against the traditional couture, which I find it very interesting. I think, you know, more maybe young audiences will be, you know, paying attention and to want to get to know more about the couture world.
Interesting. Let's look at two gowns kind of under the auspices of both Demna's ideas and Christóbal Balenciaga's ideas. Christina, I'm thinking about look 47 first. So in terms of a marriage of both visions under that Balenciaga name, do we think that this gown is successful?
Yes, because you could hear this. This is one of the, as I was saying earlier, you could hear this coming through before, like 2-3 looks prior, you could hear it. So I anticipated seeing something that was extraordinary, and it is quite beautiful because there's an extraordinary amount of handwork that's gone into that textile. The silhouette is very simple, but what you want from couture is to know that piece has been labored over for hundreds of hours, and I can see and appreciate that piece has been, just from one image. I mean, seeing it up close would be a whole other level, but it really is quite beautiful.
I agree. For me, it is a perfect reinterpretation of some of Balenciaga's own models, you know, in which he's referencing his Spanish heritage, the indigenous folk dress of Spain, which was very current and very much in people's cultural awareness during the period that he was working. And, you know, it's that use of Spanish black, of black on black, which makes you think of you know, 17th century Dutch paintings. And the use of sequins and so on. And it really ties into a lot of Spanish folk dress, which of course he tapped into and was inspired by all the time. And he collected a lot of folk dress, which is now in the Galliera collection in Paris. So for me, that's what I see when I see that dress, and I think it's just a lovely evocation of the Balenciaga heritage, cultural heritage. Yeah.
Stephen, any thoughts?
I'm just enjoying what Cally is saying. It's very impressive.
Oh, there we go. You see, there's a lovely picture there. That's one of, yes, great. Thanks for finding that.
But also it fits really well and really nicely into, I think there are almost subsects within the collection. There's, if you look the looks previous and after, there's a collation of about six or seven looks that are just pure black on black, like you said, different textiles, different textures, but they work really well as like a mini collation of looks in themselves. It's kind of a little story within the story, essentially. And like that one, that look there, look 43. I don't know whether you want to discuss that now, but I adore that. I think it's a really, really simple silhouette, but it looks beautiful. And going back to what I said at the start, in that throughout this couture season, what we've seen so far, there have been some dire collections and some amazing collections. This silhouette, I saw something similar at Off-White, and it was awful. It had a high neckline. Do you know what I mean? And I imagine that and like this is I use as a good example of a clean execution of this simple silhouette, which harks back to like late 60s. Do you know what I mean? Sort of silhouettes that Christóbal was making. So it does look, yeah, it's perfect.
It's such a difficult, I mean, it's so difficult technically as well,
Yeah,
that's a masterclass in construction, just as he was a master. He was the architect of cloth, wasn't he? And that's a very architectural shape. I think that if I may just mention something I do want to say, which is that I love the way that he's continued doing that thing which Balenciaga did, which was that the front and the back of the dress are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
Almost every garment is completely different in back and front. And one of my favorites is I think it's cerulean blue, 55 trench coat, because in the front it's a trench coat, and in the back it's a sort of, as you say, with watteau pleats falling from the shoulders, it's completely loose, flowing sort of opera coat type thing. And it reminds me of one of my favorite garments by Balenciaga, which was a beautiful double-breasted woolen coat for the winter that he did in 1951, and somebody reported on it saying that which I think is terribly funny, it's a fitted coat, and going it's a loose one, because coming towards you saw one thing, but when the model went past you saw something completely different. And he's carried on doing that with nearly all of these. They're nearly all different from front and back, and that is also another testament to the skill of the work here.
Also, that lends itself to Demna's fusion of his, I suppose, anti couture. Like I said, Demna is not what I would consider couture. Like going before seeing this collection, what I've seen of his work, it's not necessarily, because he includes and pushes so much workwear into his work. But these silhouettes are quite nice, because from the like you said, using that example of the cerulean gown, from the front it does simply look, it's very workwear. But obviously from the back it's more evocative of a gown. So you've got this duality to the silhouettes, which will lend itself perfectly for editorial, because obviously this is essentially what couture is. It's an image maker.
Christina, could we look at exit 51, please? So this one kind of references, Christóbal's, I think it was his 1952 collection, which kind of dropped the hip line in the dresses and the gowns. And I just felt this one was incredibly successful in terms of melding the historic genius and kind of the new brilliance. What do we think about this particular dress?
Well, it's real red carpet stuff, isn't it? Yeah. I think there's something quite witty about it, and I think people always talk about Balenciaga as if he was a miserable
like a Scrooge, like a curmudgeon.
Kind of, you know, he hasn't got a sort of
Funny bone.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of wit in his things actually. When you look at some of the hats, they're terribly funny, and you know, I just think there's also wit here as well, and maybe that dress makes me smile. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of what I want to see from, like, this dress is atypical of what I want to see from a couture collection. Personally, I adore the tailoring, and I think that is where I really do appreciate that it is couture and it's high level. But these dresses, this level of theatricality, I think this dress, and similarly to look 49 and some of the more illustrious ones, so like look 62, these silhouettes are they all come into that realm of what I personally would expect from couture. I feel like this sits nicely next to that look we were just looking at. They're traditional silhouettes that they accentuate the female form in such a perfect way, with this beautiful release, either the waist or like with the fishtail. It's what I like to see from that. So I think that sits nicely with the one we were looking at, which was look 51. They both are, and I also think they fit nicely within the collection. They're not too far at the end, because normally with a gown, some people throw them right at the end of the collection and have filler throughout. But it's nice, nicely separated, nicely segregated.
So Joshua, you felt that this was kind of systematically sequenced and not just kind of like, let's just slapdashedly throw the gowns at the end.
Because I mean, some designers do. I mean, we probably all know that some designers do, not necessarily couture all the time, but especially with ready to wear, they'll make a body of work and know that they need evening gowns, and they'll slap 3 evening gowns at the end of the collection and be like, oh, ta-da. But I think this is nicely, well, it's well considered, but also it fits well with the other silhouettes, because like we were saying, obviously some of the other silhouettes, there's duality in that they look like workwear, but they are an evening gown from the back, or an evening gown from the front and workwear in the back. So it's a nice fusion, and that blends really well with these more traditional silhouettes like 51, because then it doesn't feel so out of place. It doesn't feel like you've got more functional clothing and then these evening gowns thrown in. It feels like a nice transition from these from the tailor pieces all the way through to these gowns at the end. It's like a story.
Yeah. How did you feel about the menswear?
Me specifically, or?
Yeah, you specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I quite liked it. I thought it was quite nice. It was nothing crazy. What I'm most interested in, and it's perhaps bouncing a question back to you lot, is I don't know how much the menswear separates itself from the ready-to-wear. Because the ready-to-wear for Balenciaga is quite strong anyway, or has been strong for quite a few seasons in terms of their tailoring and these sort of silhouettes. And obviously, I don't really want to focus too much on the more casual workwear pieces, but specifically the tailoring. It's very similar to some of the tailored looks that we've seen from Balenciaga and their ready-to-wear. So I'm not sure, do you think this is high-end enough, or is it pushed enough to be couture, or is it just they've copied and pasted from ready to wear? That would be my only, it's not criticism necessarily, but more line of questioning.
It felt more just a part of the world that he's been offering these last few years. So it's like, you can't just show women's wear. He never would. There's kind of a democracy of gender with everything that he does. And so with that kind of menswear idea that he's developed over the last 4 years, you know, we see the familiar shapes, we see the familiar sportswear. So nothing felt a little odd or too surprising. However, there was kind of a black, high-shouldered, hairy coat. And as that moved, I was a little excited by that one, because like there was kind of, again, you know, we talk about the Christóbalisms, and in the kind of collar, the high tip collar, like that collar kind of resembles the birds in flight accents from Christóbal's panel dresses from the mid-60s, the folds within those wedding dresses. And so from the kind of exaggerate that collar, I thought was just incredibly successful. Cally, what do you think about that? Do I sound too clueless?
About the menswear?
Yeah, particularly the tipped collars.
Yeah.
Look 58, looks 56 and 58.
Oh, okay. I quite like the menswear. I mean, he introduced the, you know, again, the hourglass shape in his suits, which I thought was really, really clever. I'm not sure whether you've done that before or not. Which number did you say? Sorry, 50?
56.
Yes, I'm with you, yeah. 56.
Yeah.
And 58, yeah. I just think, you know, I'm sure there's probably a market for that, particularly number 58, look 58. I think that's probably quite commercial, you know, in terms of couture. But I just thought the tailoring was beautiful, and so the first group, you know, of sort of 1 to, I know it's kind of crossover tailoring, but you know, number 6, that suit with just the white edge at the bottom of the sleeves, and it's all about really subtle details, but also he's changed the silhouette. You know, he's got the hourglass shape there, the cinched in waist and the emphasis on the hips, and then in some of the suits he's broadened the shoulders a lot, and there's a lovely overcoat, number 14, which is again has got the accent on the hips. I mean, I'd love to see the back views of some of these. But
Stephen, I feel like we're leaving you out. What did you think of some of the menswear? What were some of your favorite looks?
I think for me, you know, going back to, you know, the couture of the menswear and some of the looks, I think couture is, for me personally, it's about the craftsmanship, and what the collection is, you know, including, even with the jeans and the menswear coat and gowns. I think it's a brand new perspective of couture. Like, you know, who is, you know, in 2021 is still trying to restrict couture into like evening gowns. So I think personally, I find, you know, the looks very successful, and at the same time, you know, the heels on the menswear works really well as well with the collection. Yeah, and also personally, I think the boundary of couture is evolving in a way. I would wear, for example, like Balenciaga sportswear to something very like official and formal. So yeah, and I find the menswear very successful, and the looks with the heavy fabric, I think, you know, it's got the spirit of Balenciaga using, you know, choosing fabric against gravity. So I find it very smart. The look with the, let me see, look 50, for example. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's used these robes before. Like he used these robes in fall 21 collection. You know, we're kind of analyzing the workwear aspects of this collection, and do they work or don't they work? Do you think that, as you say, the ideas of couture, what constitutes a couture client, and also what constitutes a couture garment, you know, these things help that kind of new thinking create a new access point?
I think it definitely does help. And also you can see from the previous seasons from other houses, you know, people are introducing t-shirts, you know, to couture, and, you know, things that's, you know, a lot more casual. So I think, you know, this is just a combination of, you know, all, like most of the little dedications to Demna's own work and the history of Balenciaga, you know, into something new to the couture.
Right. Joshua and Cally, what did we think of the elevated t-shirts in the collection? You had kind of like that Christóbal padding to kind of like fluffy them out and give them some volume. What did we think about those in a couture context? Did it work, or did it not land for you?
Joshua, you go.
I was going to say, not not massively a fan of those. I did, because I did know at first, I did see, I think specifically we might be talking about look 36, because that is a t-shirt, and I did think it was simply a t-shirt. I think you can see more so in the film that the hem, it seems to be like like you said, padded and kind of like scrunched up. It gives it volume at the hem of the t-shirt, but I mean, for me, that's not enough detail to elevate it from simply a t-shirt. I mean, I don't want to overtly criticize. I think these sort of looks that are the more t-shirt basic, like look 34 as well, which is like a shirt with a jumper over it. These are the looks that I would avoid. And I don't personally want to talk about those too much for me, because I think the overall collection was really quite well, and really quite nice. And I think if you ignore these like couple of looks that, I mean, may work well in ready to wear. In fact, I think they would work well in ready to wear, but I just don't think they should have filtered through to couture necessarily. And going back to what you were saying about dissecting, like the workwear, and thinking about those robes, which fits into the same category of like these simple basics. I think there's two looks next to each other, 52 and 53. 52 is the robes, and 53 to me looks like a wind jacket. But it's obviously shaped and sculpted, like the fabric that I think I assume it's a silk. But the structure of it and how it moved, the crispness of it, it almost looked to me like a windbreaker. Do you know what I mean? The big ones that you wear when you, like, I know, going fishing or going outside, going walking. And to me, this seemed like an elevation of that, almost like a development of that very basic workwear staple. And I think in my mind, that's how I would like to see him interpret this workwear element into couture. And then the examples of the robes, the t-shirts, all of those are perhaps the more lackluster pieces for me. I think they could have been avoided, but.
I mean, I'm a bit old school, you know, for me, tailoring is couture for men. And I can see your point, Joshua, completely. I guess he's just trying to appeal to, you know, a young audience and just make it real and current for now. But for me, I barely noticed them, to be honest. I was zoning in on the beautiful suits and overcoats.
In Demna trying to consider couture products being for everyone, kind of leveling that playing field for entryways, did any of you find the show suffered from being too democratic? Like, you know, we can generally envision someone in Balenciaga, like Cally brought up Mona von Bismarck, and, you know, you think of Aesop Rocky with Demna's era, you think of Charlotte Gainsbourg from Nicolas Jesquer's era. You know, you can see maybe Rihanna and Stella Tennant in some of Demna's clothes as well. But did these clothes feel devoid of character, or do you think that they had a real personality? What do we think about that?
Gosh, I think they have massive personality. I think they'll filter through, and, you know, I think they'll be very visible in some form or another. Yeah, definitely. And democracy. What was the quote you said at the beginning about Chanel that we were supposed to be referencing?
Dress shabbily and they remember the dress. Dress impeccably and they remember the woman.
Right. I need to think about that. But that's something that could be applied here, I think, to that.
Yeah.
To that argument. Yeah.
I think a couture collection needs to be democratic in the sense that people need to be able to look at it and aspire and really visualize themselves in it. It doesn't necessarily mean they will wear it or it would fit in with their life. But like a woman needs to look at like a gown or an expensive piece, or a man needs to look at this exquisite piece of tailoring and think, God, I wish I could wear that. And they would imagine this situation, scenario. Because couture is a dream world, essentially. It is a heightened state of, it is the highest state of fashion that you can push ideas, really. So I think it does need to have that level of democracy to it, but I don't think it needs to be as democratic as some of these looks are, as in like some of them are a bit too accessible for me. It needs to touch a fine line. It needs to feel out of reach, but also like you could almost see yourself in that situation wearing it, because it needs to be able to, because couture is essentially a large advert for the brand. It will be photographed everywhere for everyone to see. So you need to be able to, couture is a difficult one because it needs to do so much. It needs to reflect what the ready-to-wear and what the sellable pieces under that brand are. It also needs to appeal to a very specific clientele, which are like these 1,000-odd people that do buy these expensive pieces. But it also needs to widen the average everyday person's mind, or broaden their mind, so that they can imagine themselves in a situation wearing that piece. That wouldn't fit in with their reality necessarily, but they can imagine themselves in a situation aspirationally that they would be able to wear that. So it's a weird one.
Yeah. Stephen?
I think the collection has a great balance in terms of, to answer your question. It's got, a bit of, like a whole development ever since, Demna joined Balenciaga, but doesn't lose the sense of, couture. Like you can still see a few really nicely crafted gowns and even the jeans. So I think it's a really nice balance between what he does and what couture is.
I guess in keeping with kind of the double helix of these two throughout the collection, you think about maybe Christóbal Balenciaga and why he stopped, because the real, the real on the street, the accessible ease of fashion became too much for him. And so the unreal was no longer an incentive to continue. Whereas with Demna in lockdown, he said that he found flight in couture's fantasy. And so the unreal kind of inspired his real. As these couture collections move forward, because I think he intends to do like one annually, do we want to see more of both's vision, or do we want to see Demna kind of like assert his own presence onto the house while remaining respectful, but maybe not so 50%, 50%? What do we think?
I mean,
I'm sorry.
No, you go.
Okay, I think I'm very excited for the second collection already. With the the mixture of gender and also the mixture of the heritage with with Demna, because you cannot deny the use of heritage in a really Demna way, but not losing the respect. So I'm looking forward to the next collection already. Yeah, Kelly, sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. I was just going to say that I think, when Christóbal retired in 1968, it was, just at the cusp of a huge change and paradigm shift in terms of fashion, the arrival of ready-to-wear in the boutique and so on. And there were very few of that old brigade of the couturiers who were able to adapt. It was really only Saint Laurent, who was already established, who managed to adapt to that paradigm shift, and then the younger people like Courrèges and Cardin and so on, but they weren't really sort of big names. And I think in a way, we may be going through the same kind of transitional period now, where the whole idea, or rather the clientele for couture, has completely changed. And obviously it's got to stay current and accessible and appealing for the sort of people who can afford it. As Joshua says, it's a very small number of people. But Louise Wilson used to say to me sometime, well, she once said to me that, there's a problem with the word fashion. If we call it garment manufacture, it would be much more seriously taken. And after all, fashion is an industry, it's a business. And the label has to earn money, it has to earn its keep. And I understand it makes a huge amount of money from selling trainers, but it's got to be seen to be a successful brand. And so obviously he's going to have an eye towards his clientele when he's designing. And so that's what it's about, really.
Yeah, I honestly, just to add on to that, I think that I agree with you. I think that it would be nice to see more from him. I would like to see Demna dive more into the archive, but I would like to see him not necessarily replicate the pieces. I think this show has been quite a good precedent for how couture at Balenciaga will go forward, and I think it would be nice to see him utilize and interpret and adapt different silhouettes in his way, because I think this has been a successful collection that shows he can take those traditional silhouettes and make them work through a more contemporary lens. And it would be nice to see him approach different silhouettes of a variety, and perhaps even create something entirely new, propose something entirely new, which obviously is a bit enormous feat for a designer to do, to create something absolutely new, because everything is a remix of what already exists. But I think that that would be doable through seeing this. Maybe I'm over giving him more credit than is due. I don't know, but because it's only one collection. But I think it's a good start. And also, I think these larger silhouettes, these more extravagant pieces in this collection, really lend themselves to how we are at the moment. Because culture in itself, there's always a boom of excess after a period of, I suppose, depression societally. So if you think back to like 2010 with the depression, then the years following, like 2011, 2012, art, culture, music, everything in general was very excessive. You have these like celebrities, art, everything was very over the top. And I think the same thing will happen now. And you can see it through some of the collections we've seen recently. So looking at like Richard Quinn recently, I know that isn't technically couture, but it does fit into this same realm. It's excess for the sake of excess, and it's beautiful. And this is, so you can see that in some of these silhouettes. It's not necessarily overly embellished, but the actual expanse of the scale of these pieces fits really nicely into this overt world, which I think we're going to want to see more of, because post-pandemic we want a distraction from the realities of how the world has changed.
As we wrap up, I'm going to close with a final question, maybe. Thinking about what Cally said about fashion being a business and garment making being a proper business, Demna Gvasalia is a very practical designer, and whether successful or not, he does kind of hardwire his approach to the idea of a wardrobe where you have a trench coat, a t-shirt, denim, proper hoodie, blazer, et cetera, et cetera. And so as a couture client, let's say that we're all there and we've all got our checkbooks and our Venmos at the ready. Are these clothes that each of you would order?
That's a really hard one to answer. Yes, if I had limitless funds, of course I would, but I don't lead the kind of lifestyle that
We're dreaming though. We're dreaming, Cally.
Oh my God, yes. Well, then I'd buy all the tailored suits and overcoats. I just think they're really, really beautiful, and I would go and buy one tomorrow if I could.
Right. Stephen, what do you think about the show? Are there things you would order as a couture client?
Yes, a lot of things if I am able to afford all of them. Yeah, the coat, the denim, even some of the accessories. The bag itself is very, like irony in a way, but very straightforward and, on trend. Yeah, I would order a lot of pieces.
Nice. Joshua, you're our final dreamer today.
Yeah, of course. Do you know what? If I had a bank account that allowed me to, I would buy a majority of the collection. I think the tailoring is impeccable. I think it fits really nicely. I also don't think it's the kind of tailoring that will date. Do you know what I mean? They're not the silhouettes aren't too overt or aren't too linked to specific tropes that I think it will fit nicely into an average wardrobe. Do you know what I mean? If you had the budget to. Favorite look out of the whole collection though would have to be really simply look 13. Which is really quite, it's nothing crazy, but it's just a nice leather skirt with, I think it's a tailored piece, or you've got the same shoulders, but the hats, I mean, I just wanted to just quickly touch on the hats before I finish up. The hats I think are beautiful. For me personally, they look very much like, I think it's like 2011 Mugler, which was obviously a reinterpretation of Mugler from like the 90s. But the glasses and the hats look very much like that. And the reason I say that is because of that sheen you've got on those hats. It looks I mean, but I don't hate that they're in Balenciaga. I don't hate that. I don't even hate if they were an intentional copy. I think they work really well, and obviously the same sort of silhouette and hat as Christóbal would have made many years ago. So I love a hat. So I think that, you know, those sort of looks, and this look we're seeing now moving on the screen, the denim, like I talked about earlier, these hats, I think, yeah, I would buy it all. I'd buy it all.
Can I do a favourite? The one I'd like to wear into college every day is look number 19.
Look 19.
And it has gone past us on the screen.
Oh, yeah. I love that jacket. It's a good jacket.
You will look great. You know.
Oh.
All right, let's close on a greedy note, panel. Congrats to Demna and the team, and thank you to the panelists, and thank you all for watching. For more extensive Fashion Week coverage, just pump it on over to SHOWstudio.com. And if you're watching via SHOWstudio's YouTube, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe below, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.